Hi everyone. I will be discussing about chapter 15.4 or lesson 4, ethics and impacts of biotechnology, and pages 436 to 439. Our objectives: we're going to describe some of the issues that relate to biotechnology, identify some of the pros and cons of genetically modified food, and describe some of the ethical issues relating to biotechnology. So questions have been raised in order to come up with laws that will protect the people against discrimination based on their genetic information. And these were some of the questions. What privacy issues about biotechnology were raised? That's what I've said. What if the government wants to use an individual's DNA for another purpose in a criminal investigation or a paternity suit, let's say? What if health insurance providers manage their healthcare policies based on a genetic predisposition to disease? So how do private companies protect the privacy of their innovation in which they also benefit from their discoveries and gain profits? Private biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies do much of research involving GM or genetically modified plants and animals. Their goal is largely to develop profitable new crops, drugs, tests, or other products. Like most inventors, they protect their discoveries and innovations with patents. What is patent? It is a legal tool that gives an individual or company the exclusive right to profit from its innovations for a number of years. So what can be patented? Molecules and DNA molecules can be patented. In fact, roughly one-fifth of the known genes in the human genome are now patented commercially. So this graph shows the rise in the number of nucleic acid patents between 1985 and 2005. Laboratory techniques like PCR or polymerase chain reaction have also been patented. When a scientist wants to run a PCR test, he or she must pay a fee for the license to use this process. In this way, private company owners can also gain profit. The ability to patent is meant to spur discovery and advancements in medicine and industry, but sometimes patent holders demand high fees that block other scientists from exploring certain lines of research. So patents are beneficial to mankind, yet may also cost a lot. So in this case of the development of pro-vitamin A enriched golden rice, patent disputes kept the rice out of the hands of farmers for years. Biotechnology is used to discover the identity of a person, but when it comes to your own DNA, how much privacy are you entitled to? Just like, for example, the Tomb of the Unknowns in Arlington National Cemetery near Washington, D.C. holds the remains of unknown American soldiers who fought for nation's wars. In order to provide more unknown soldiers, the U.S. military now requires all personnel to give a DNA sample when they begin their service. And this also assures that the remains of loved ones can be properly identified for burial. Those DNA samples are kept on file and used, if needed, to identify the remains of individuals who perished in the line of duty. So more questions have been raised regarding discrimination based on personal genetic information. So like for example, what if the government wants to use an individual's DNA sample for a criminal investigation or a paternity suit? Another, what if health insurance providers manage their healthcare policies based on a genetic predisposition to disease? And suppose that years after giving a DNA sample, an individual is barred from employment or rejected for health insurance because of a genetic defect detected in the sample. Would this be a fair and reasonable use of genetic information? So in 2008, the United States Congress passed the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which protects Americans against discrimination based on their genetic information. This act protects Americans against discrimination based on their genetic information. Physicians and ethicists hope this will lead to more effective use of personal genetic information without fear of prejudice in obtaining health insurance or employment. How safe are GMOs or genetically modified organisms? Are GMOs or GM foods safe? Careful studies of such foods have provided no scientific support for concerns about their safety, and it does seem that foods made from GM plants are safe to eat. So as of now, further studies are still going on to ensure the safety of GMO. Let us first discuss the pros or the advantage of GMOs. One of that can benefit from biotechnology are the farmers. So farmers choose GM crops because they produce higher yields, reducing the amount of land and energy that must be devoted to agriculture and lowering the cost of food for everyone. Insect-resistant GM plants need little, if any, insecticide to grow successfully, reducing the chance that chemical residues will enter the food supply and lessening damage to the environment. Careful studies of GM foods have provided no scientific support for concerns about their safety, and it does seem that foods made from GM plants are safe to eat. Let's take a look at the disadvantage of GMOs. Critics point out that no long-term studies have been made of the hazards these foods might present. Some worry that the insect resistance engineered into GM plants may threaten beneficial insects, killing them as well as pests or crop pests. Others express concerns that use of plants resistant to chemical herbicides may lead to overuse of these weed-killing compounds. Another concern is that the patents held on GM seeds by the companies that produce them may prove costly enough to force small farmers out of business, especially in the developing world. So why labels are important? As I have said earlier, studies are still ongoing to further test the effects of GM foods to organisms, and later on we would know that it could pose greater risk in our health. In the United States, current federal regulations treat GM foods and non-GM foods equally. GM foods are not required to undergo special safety testing before entering the market. No additional labeling is required to identify a product as genetically modified unless its ingredients are significantly different from its conventional counterpart. The possibility that meat from GM animals may soon enter the food supplies has heightened concerns about labeling. So as a result, some states have begun to consider legislation to require the labeling of GM foods, thereby providing consumers with an informed choice. So what are the ethical issues to humans does biotechnology have? So questions have been raised regarding ethics or ethical issues that biotechnology faces. Should genetic modifications to humans and other organisms be closely related? Just because we have the technology to modify an organism's characteristics, are we justified in doing so? So biotechnology has given us the ability to know ourselves more and more. But with this knowledge, however, comes responsibility, just like what was done in GFP genes, which are capable of the luminescence or lighting up of jellyfish. GFP genes can easily be extracted from a jellyfish and spliced onto genes coding for important cellular proteins. This ability has led to significant new discoveries about how cells functions. The same GFB technology was used to create fluorescent zebrafish, and this fish, along with fluorescent mice, tadpoles, rabbits, and even cats, have all contributed to our understanding of cells and proteins. But the ability to alter life forms for any purpose, scientific or non-scientific, raises important questions, such as just because we have the technology to modify an organism characteristics or organisms characteristics, are we justified in doing so? If human cells can be manipulated to cure disease, should biologists try to engineer taller people or change their eye color, hair texture, sex, blood group, or appearance? What will happen to the human species when we gain the opportunity to design our bodies or those of our children? What will be the consequences if biologists develop the ability to clone human beings by making identical copies of their cells? These questions with which society must come to grips. The goal of biology is to gain a better understanding of the human nature. As our knowledge increases, however, so does our ability to manipulate the genetics of living things, including ourselves. In a democratic nation, all citizens are responsible for ensuring that the tools has given us are used wisely. We should all be prepared to help develop a thoughtful and ethical consensus of what should and should not be done with the human genome. So let us now summarize our lesson. Most of the research in genetic engineering is done by private companies. They patent their findings and inventions to protect their investment and make a profit. The patents block other scientists from pursuing certain lines of research. In 2007, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act was signed into law in the United States. It prohibits discrimination based on genetic information. There is controversy about the safety of GM foods. Proponents of genetically modified foods argue that GM crops are better, safer, and higher yielding than conventional crops. GM crops require less land and energy to grow, and insecticides need not be applied to insect-resistant strains. Careful studies have provided no support for concerns about the safety of GM crops. Opponents argue that the safety of GM crops have been neither adequately tested for long-term use nor regulated. Patents on GM seeds may force small farmers out of business. The resistance of GM plants to insects may harm beneficial insect species. Resistance to herbicides may result in the overuse of toxic chemicals. Some states have introduced legislation to require that GM foods be labeled. In Ethics of the New Biology, few argue that gene therapy for curing disease is ethically wrong, but many ask the question of how far genetic modification should go. Is it right to try to engineer children to have certain characteristics? And should human cloning be allowed? So that's it for this lesson on ethics and impacts of biotechnology. So let us now answer two questions or two lesson check questions. Number one question, what is a patent? A patent is a legal tool that gives an individual or company the exclusive right to profit from its innovations for a number of years. Number two question, how could biotechnology affect your privacy? Sample answer would be, it could be used to analyze my DNA and bar me from employment or health insurance based on genetic information. So thank you girls for watching. Have a nice day. That ends our discussion. Thank you.